Hi, I'm Old Norse Specialist Dr. Jackson Crawford. On my Patreon-supported YouTube channel, I talk about topics in Norse language, myth, runes, etc. And today, I want to deal with a quick look at the difference between three terms that come up pretty often in the videos where I cover runes. These are transcription, transliteration, and translation. How are these different? How are they related? I'm going to look at a sample runic inscription and show you how each one looks. So the sample runic inscription I'm going to talk about here is cataloged as Värmland 1. It is from Jarlsberg, Jarlsberg, I should say, to pronounce it more Swedish. Now hold on, if I want to be really Swedish, Jarlsberg. I picked this partially because it's an inscription I'm pretty likely to see in Sweden later this summer, so maybe I can revisit this with a part 2 pointing at the inscription itself. Also because it shows a bunch of relevant things to think about in terms of transcription, transliteration, and translation in a fairly short inscription, and it's an Elder Futhark, which people care about more than younger Futhark. I just have to face that. So here's the inscription, transcribed. Now think about the Latin roots in these terms. Trans is a preposition meaning across, right, like across a mountain, from the same Indo-European root as the English preposition through, not best translatable by through, but really more like across. So across written. I've just written it somewhere else, but I'm still reflecting the alphabet that it's originally written in and as much of the original context as I can. I've written runes right to left where they're written right to left in the original, like at the very top left of the inscription is the beginning of a word, starts height. This is probably the verb heitan in Proto-Norse, mean like to be named. Since that's written right to left, it's written right to left in my transcription, right? I'm not changing anything that I can leave unchanged and yet copy it onto another medium. I don't have any word spaces reflected, because of course there's no spaces between the words in the original. There are two dots between two of the words in the original. I've reproduced those, but only there. The other words aren't separated. And where bind runes are used, right, two runes written together as one combined letter, I have represented those. My transcription here is a so-called narrow inscription, because I'm trying pretty hard to get lots of little details in that are hard to reproduce in typing. That includes this rough spot in the rock, a couple rough spots in the rock that the rune carver worked around, and the way that the runes at the very right edge of the rock kind of get mashed in as he's trying to work with these rough spots, and then the edge of the rock itself, and even turn from writing left to right to left at the very right, where we see Runo's Waritu wrote runes. It is left to right from Runo's to Wa, or to Wa, and then the Aritu is written right to left, and especially the E2 is just smashed in there to try to make use of the space that's there. This is a very real phenomenon of runic inscriptions, that they are trying to, they probably, except in the case of some very nice, very formal, and especially somewhat later, younger Futhark inscriptions where there's kind of a sense of it being a monument for the public, they're often probably not kind of sketching it out ahead of time. They're probably sort of executing it right then and there, and not always realizing that at the size of letters that they're writing, they don't have space to write the entire message that they want to. Alright, that's transcription. Just across writing it down in a different place, but with as many details the same as possible, especially in a more narrow transcription. A broader transcription might preserve just a a little bit fewer details. A broader transcription here wouldn't show you where the rough spots in the rock are and might try to just put this into two neat lines, but it would still be written in the Elder Futhark alphabet and still shown right to left or left to right, depending on what the original writing direction is. Elder Futhark's very inconsistent about that. Having shown you transcription, let me give you a quick word from my friends and partners, Grimfrost, not very far from where this stone is, and then I will show you a transliteration of it and a translation of it. Alright, so if I transliterate this inscription, I across-letter it, right? I carry it across alphabets and put it into our Roman alphabet. Now, we have conventions about how runes are represented in the Roman alphabet in transliteration. It is important to transliterate very often because, of course, runic keyboards are few and far between. If we want to economically produce a book, or even say a video about runic inscriptions, it's much easier to transliterate than to try to represent everything in the original runic alphabet. Our conventions for representing runes vary a little bit from person to person. A good example of that with Elder Futhark is that some scholars will represent the rune that originally meant a Z sound, but in later in Scandinavia it comes to represent an R sound. Some scholars represent that as a Z, and then some scholars, sort of looking forward to the later Scandinavian history of that letter, will write it as a capital R, as distinct from a small letter R, which is what the Elder Futhark letter Ride, though the original Germanic R is written with. I tend to write a Z because in Elder Futhark, I think that it was still probably a Z, even fairly late in Scandinavia before it became an R. But that's an example of how transliteration practices will differ. Alright, so I've transliterated this inscription for you here. A couple things to note. If I'm writing with a really narrow transliteration, right, preserving more details, I might not show word spaces. Here I'm being a little bit broader and showing you spaces between the words just because it makes it easier to read. We're more used to that in the Roman alphabet, whereas they certainly weren't in Elder Futhark. I have put height in parentheses there just to emphasize that it seems to be a different sentence almost, right? It's not, it doesn't have anything to do with anything else there. Obviously part of this inscription is lost, and that part probably filled in more of the context of the quote sentence that height is part of in the top left. If I want to be a little bit narrow, I can show some arrows above the letters to show whether they were actually originally written left to right or right to left. We don't conventionally transliterate right to left Elder Futhark by writing right to left in Roman letters because that's just so unusual. You know, no one writes any language that way in the Roman alphabet. We also don't typically try to make bind letters where the original Futhark has bind runes. Instead, we draw a little arc above the runes that are bound into one, as you can see with the air and erilas, or the ha and the as and haravanaz, or really haravanaz. Or sometimes if you don't have that ability to type an arc above the letters, just typing a caret between the two letters that are connected is an acceptable transliteration. Sometimes different chunks of an inscription having different meanings, different quote-unquote sentences, in other words, are separated by a paragraph sign. I typically don't like to do that, although you could do it here with like ek erilas runos waritu. The erilas wrote the runes, because that's one complete thought or quote sentence. I don't like it because I think that it can suggest to people that there is a paragraph or line break that isn't there, but you'll often see that in people's transliteration. Alright, now for a very broad, almost transliteration, we can try to make this into the words that we think are actually underlying what's written there. Let me explain what I mean by that real quick. There's no dictionary of Old Norse, certainly of Proto-Norse at the time that inscriptions are being carved in the runic alphabet. So different carvers are going to spell words different ways, and they're going to hear their own pronunciations different ways. And this is clearly a writer who is uncomfortable writing two consonants together. So there are a couple places here where we know there was never a vowel there based on other inscriptions that are roughly contemporary or even earlier, and based on descendant languages and even related languages from other members of the Indo-European family. The two words in question are waritu, where we really should see ritu, right? This is in fact the exact same word as becomes English right, W-R-I-T-E. So the A there is unnecessary, but again, the inscriber seems uncomfortable writing a consonant and then another consonant. It's all kinds of questions about exactly how that discomfort would arise. And then haravanaz would represent actually hravanaz. This is, or even hravnaz. Again, he's inserted an A after consonants that would actually be followed just by another consonant. This is the word raven, right? This is Old Norse, right? 700, 600 years later, hraven, but hravnaz in Proto-Norse. Again, the inscriber just doesn't feel comfortable with those A's. You could put, if you're trying to make a broader transliteration, you could put those A's in parentheses or brackets maybe to show that they don't quote-unquote belong there, linguistically, etymologically, philologically speaking. But I think it is probably better practice in a transliteration to say a little bit broader and show what's really there. Another way that sometimes people will deal with unnecessary excrescent letters like that is to write them in superscript, right? A smaller letter above the line. Alright, now if I translate this, it's not just a matter of putting it into the Roman alphabet, it's a matter of carrying over translatio into another language. So if I translate this into English, I actually can't translate the whole thing because I mentioned before that in the top left of the inscription is a partial word height, and we don't know what the rest, what the context there is. It's a verb, something is named, somebody is named, but we don't know who. We also see at the bottom left in front of the colon-like word separator, uvas hite. This is probably, hite is probably the first person singular present form of that same verb, haitan. We'd actually expect hite. Here's actually a place where the inscriber has probably left out an A instead of inserted one. So this is probably somebody is named, I am named, hite, and then the name ended in uvas. It's been speculated that the name was perhaps leuvas, loved one, dear one, one potential ancestor form of the Old Norse name labor, but of course we don't know exactly what the name was because that side of the inscription is just missing. It's also possible that the inscriber is the one who is named Hravanaz, the name that follows right after that, right? Raven. I'm named Raven, and of course Hravan is a well-known name from centuries later, the Old Norse period. The easiest part to translate, put into English or another language, is ek erilas runos waritu. I, erilas. We don't know exactly what this word means in Proto-Norse. It seems like it very well could be the ancestor form of the Old Norse word jarl, meaning noble. But there have been other, I think, more tenuous explanations of what it means put forward. It seems to have a special meaning, though, in Proto-Norse that it doesn't have in the later Old Norse language. It's more than noble. It's something that does have something to do with the ability to write, presumably, or maybe a very high status social position that involves writing. I have a video planned for the future looking into this word and some other words that are fairly mysterious from our Elder Futhark inscriptions like Alu. But I, the Erilas, again, some kind of high status position, write runes, runos. And that gives you a translation. Now, some people might stick to the word order of the original. That would produce a little bit more of a word soup in English. We'd get something like am named, the partial word, I, Erilas, runes right, something, I am named, Raven. But if I'm going to translate, I prefer to just go the whole hog and give you a translation that's in English word order, right? if I want to be pretty strict about presenting to you a runic inscription, particularly let's say that I have discovered a new one, or I am publishing a very new interpretation of one that's been known before, I'm probably going to use all of these, right? I'm going to start with a very narrow transcription, and I'm going to go all the way to a broad translation that puts it into, everyday understandable English that expresses something like the thought that the original rune carver had. In as much as we can know that, and usually we can as long as the inscription is reasonably complete. Alright, well, Patreon, thank you so much for your continued support and kindness. It means the world to me, and it's what allows me to keep making these videos for a living in the most beautiful places in the world, high up in the Rocky Mountains in Wyoming and Colorado. And it means a lot to me that so many of you have stuck with me for, in some cases, almost 6 years. That's just an incredible thought to me. Sometimes more than 6 years in the case of 5 or 10 people. You've allowed me to continue to make a living from teaching, and in fact to make a better living from teaching than I ever made teaching full-time at a university. So thank you from the bottom of my heart. And to everyone out there from beautiful Wyoming, let me wish you all the best.